It was the third week of March, 2022. The city of Chernihiv had changed so quickly that it almost felt like someone had erased the place I had known all my life and replaced it with a faded copy. Streets that used to be packed with traffic were now mostly empty. Store windows were covered with plywood. Every conversation began with the same question: "Did you hear the explosions last night?" I had been volunteering at the city's Emergency Coordination Center since the second day of the invasion. Before the war, I worked as a computer technician, fixing office equipment and installing networks for local businesses. Overnight, my laptop and toolbox were replaced by stacks of paper maps, radios, extension cords, power banks, and handwritten lists of people who needed help. The coordination center operated from the basement of an old municipal building. Thick concrete walls muffled the distant shelling, just enough that we could think. Volunteers came and went at every hour. Some packed food. Others organized medicine deliveries or searched for missing relatives. Nobody cared about job titles anymore. Engineers carried boxes. Teachers unloaded trucks. Students repaired generators. Retired electricians somehow managed to keep the lights on. Every day blended into the next. One cold morning, our coordinator, Alana, gathered everyone around a folding table covered with maps. We received information that several elderly residents are still trapped in the northern district, she said while pointing at a neighborhood outlined in blue marker. No electricity, limited water, communication is almost gone. Silence filled the room. Everyone understood what that meant. The roads leading there had been shelled repeatedly over the past week. Getting in was dangerous. Getting out could be even worse. Alana looked around the room. "I need to volunteers." Before I had time to think, my hand was already in the air. Across the table, another volunteer raised his dot. His name was Maxim. He couldn't have been older than 20-3. Back before the invasion, he had studied architecture at university. Now he spent most of his days driving humanitarian supplies across the city in an aging white delivery van that somehow refused to break down. He noticed me looking at him and smiled. "Guess we're partners." I guess so. Neither of us sounded particularly confident. Within 30 minutes, we were loading the van. Boxes of bottled water. Bread. Canned food. Insulin. Blood pressure medication. Baby formula. Blankets. Every item had someone's name written beside it on a clipboard. No deliveries were random anymore. Everything mattered. Before leaving, one of the older volunteers handed us a folded paper map. "The GPS keeps failing," he said. Maxim laughed softly. "I haven't used a paper map since middle school. You'll remember." He was right. As we drove through the city, familiar landmark looked strangely unfamiliar. Traffic lights no longer worked. Many apartment windows were covered with tape to reduce shattered glass. Public buses stood abandoned along the roadside where they had stopped weeks earlier. The only sounds were the engine of our van and the occasional echo of distant artillery somewhere beyond the river. Neither of us spoke much. There wasn't much to say. About 20 minutes into the drive, we reached our first checkpoint. Concrete blocks. Sandbags. Steel anti-tank obstacles welded into giant crosses. Local territorial defense volunteers checked every vehicle entering the district. One of the soldiers leaned toward the driver's window. "Where are you heading?" Maxim handed over our volunteer documents. "Emergency deliveries." The soldier studied the papers before nodding. "Road ahead is clear for now." He paused. "For now." Those two words carried more weight than the rest of the conversation. As we pulled away, Maxim finally broke the silence. "You know what's strange?" "What?" "I keep thinking life will suddenly go back to normal." I looked out the window. An empty playground passed by. Its swings moved slightly in the wind. "I think everyone feels that way." He nodded. Double quotes. "Every morning I wake up expecting to hear traffic outside instead of air raid sirens." Neither of us realized then that the hardest part of the day was still waiting ahead. The streets became narrower as we entered the northern part of the city. Many apartment buildings stood in complete silence. Some had shattered windows covered with blankets or plastic sheets. Others looked untouched, almost as if nothing had happened until you noticed the burned-out cars parked along the curbs or the craters scattered across the intersections. The radio crackled every few minutes with short updates from other volunteer teams. "Bridge remains closed. Medical supplies delivered. Avoid Shevchenko Street." Most of the messages lasted only a few seconds. Fuel was too valuable for long conversations. Our first stop was a 5-story apartment building near an abandoned grocery store. The entrance door no longer closed properly. Someone had wedged a brick against it to keep it from swinging open in the wind. Inside, the stairwell was dark. No electricity. Only the weak beam from our flashlights illuminated the cracked concrete steps. "We're looking for apartment 23, I said, checking the clipboard. "4th floor. We climbed slowly, carrying heavy bags filled with food and medicine. Halfway up we heard footsteps. An elderly man appeared around the corner, carrying 2 empty plastic bottles. He looked surprised to see us. "Volunteers?" "Yes." His shoulders relaxed immediately. I thought maybe. He stopped himself before finishing the sentence. Instead, he smiled. "They've been waiting for you." Apartment 23 belonged to an elderly couple named Petro and Hannah. Petro opened the door before we even knocked. "You actually made it," he whispered. His wife sat near the window, wrapped in 3 blankets, despite wearing a winter coat indoors. The apartment was freezing, without central heating. Every room felt like a refrigerator. Maxim placed the supplies on the kitchen table. "We brought your medication." Hannah covered her mouth with both hands. I thought we had maybe 2 days left. No one answered. There wasn't anything to say that could make those words less painful. Instead, we unpacked everything carefully. Bread, rice, tea, canned vegetables, painkillers, fresh batteries, a portable radio. As Maxim explained how to conserve battery power, I noticed dozens of family photographs covering one wall. Birthdays, graduations, wedding anniversaries, summer vacations by the river. Life before all of this. Petro followed my gaze. "Our grandchildren live in Lviv now." "When did they leave?" "The 2nd day." "And you?" He smiled faintly. "This apartment has been our home for 43 years. He looked around the room. I wasn't ready to leave it. I understood exactly what he meant. Sometimes people don't stay because they think it's safe. They stay because leaving means accepting that everything has changed. Before leaving, Hannah reached into a cabinet and handed us 2 small wrapped candies. "For the road. We can't take these," Maxim said gently. "You need them more than we do." She shook her head. "I've been saving them since New Year's." Her voice remained calm. "I've been waiting for someone to share them with." Neither of us argued again. Outside, we sat silently inside the van before unwrapping the candies. Neither tasted particularly special, but somehow they became the best thing I'd eaten in weeks. The next addresses went smoothly. A retired school teacher. A young mother with her 2-year-old son. An elderly mechanic living alone with his dog. Every apartment had the same questions. "Is the city still standing? Do you think this will end soon? Has anyone heard from Kiev?" We answered as honestly as we could. Sometimes honesty meant saying, "I don't know." Around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, clouds rolled across the sky, making the streets even darker. We had only one final delivery remaining. According to the list, it was an apartment at the very edge of the district. As we turned onto a narrow residential street, Maxim slowed the van. "Something's wrong." I looked ahead. The road was completely blocked, not by military vehicles. Not by rubble. By dozens of neighbors working together. Men and women of every age were clearing fallen trees with handsaws, shovels, and axes. There wasn't a single piece of heavy machinery. Only people helping one another. An older woman noticed us and waved enthusiastically. "The volunteers are here." Within seconds, several residents walked toward the van. "We'll clear enough space," one man said. "It'll only take a few minutes." Without being asked, nearly 20 people began dragging heavy branches aside. Nobody argued. Nobody complained. Everyone simply understood the assignment. Maxim looked at me through the windshield. "You know what? I don't think I've ever seen people work together like this before." I watched strangers lifting logs shoulder to shoulder. Neither have I for a brief moment. Despite everything happening around us, the street felt almost normal. Then, somewhere in the distance, the unmistakable sound of an air raid siren echoed across the city. Everyone froze. No one spoke. The only question was whether there was enough time to finish what they had started. The air raid siren echoed through the empty streets, rising and falling with a sound that everyone in Ukraine had learned to recognize far too quickly. For a second, nobody moved. Then an older man carrying an axe clapped his hands once. "Let's finish it." No panic. No shouting. Just determination. Within minutes, the residents pushed the final tree trunk aside, creating just enough space for our van to squeeze through. As we rolled past, nearly everyone waved. One woman smiled despite the tension. "Drive carefully." Maxim lowered his window. "We'll be back with more supplies in a few days. You'd better Someone replied with a laugh. It was the first genuine laugh I'd heard in weeks. Our final destination was a small apartment building tucked between two rows of old Soviet-era blocks. According to the clipboard, we were delivering medicine to a retired history teacher named Mikola. The entrance was unlocked. Inside, the hallway smelled faintly of candle wax. Several candles burned along the windowsills, lighting the staircase just enough for people to see where they were going. When we reached the third floor, the apartment door was already open. An elderly man stood waiting. "You must be the volunteers. We brought your medication," he smiled warmly. "I've been listening for your engine since this morning." Inside, the apartment looked surprisingly organized. Books covered nearly every wall. History books. Atlases. Old photographs framed carefully above a wooden desk. There wasn't a television anywhere. Instead, a small battery-powered radio quietly played the evening news. While Maxim checked the medication list, Mikola poured hot tea from a thermos. "I know you're probably in a hurry," he said, "but please, stay for 5 minutes." Normally, we would have refused. There were always more deliveries. More phone calls, more people waiting. But something about the apartment felt peaceful. For the first time all day, there were no sirens. No distant explosions, only the ticking of an old wall clock. Mikola handed each of us a steaming cup. "You know," he began, "I've taught history for almost 40 years. He looked toward the bookshelf. "My students always ask me the same question." "What was it?" Maxim asked. "How do ordinary people survive difficult times?" He smiled gently. They expected some complicated answer. "But there isn't one." He pointed toward us. "They survive exactly like you're doing, helping each other." Neither of us spoke. His words settled over the room with surprising weight. Before leaving, Mikola walked us to the door. "One more thing." He disappeared into another room and returned, holding a folded city map. Unlike ours, this one was covered with handwritten notes. Safe water points. Volunteer kitchens. Alternative roads. Buildings with functioning generators. "I've been updating it every day." He handed it to me. "You'll probably need this more than I do." I unfolded it carefully. Every corner contained neat handwriting, weeks of observations, routes that avoided damage, intersections, addresses of people willing to shelter travelers. It was more valuable than any digital map. "Thank you," he simply nodded. Double quotes, "Knowledge should always be shared." Outside, the sun was beginning to disappear behind thick gray clouds. "We should head back," Maxim said. "We're almost out of daylight." The return trip felt strangely quieter. Both of us were exhausted. Physically. Mentally. Emotionally. The city passed by outside the windows. Volunteers unloading aid from another van. Children riding bicycles in a courtyard despite everything happening around them. Neighbors carrying buckets of water together. Life hadn't stopped. It had simply changed. About 15 minutes later we approached another checkpoint. This one was busier than before. Several military vehicles stood parked nearby while territorial defense volunteers directed traffic. A soldier recognized our van immediately. "How'd it go?" "We delivered everything." He smiled. "Good." Then his expression became serious. "One more thing." He pointed towards several cardboard boxes stacked beside the checkpoint. "We received fresh humanitarian aid about an hour ago. Can you take some back to your coordination center?" Maxim looked at the boxes. "How much?" The soldier laughed. "As much as your suspension can survive." Within minutes we were loading flour, canned meat, bottled water, baby food, and medical supplies into every remaining inch of the van. When we finally closed the rear doors, the vehicle sat noticeably lower. "Think she make it?" I asked. Maxim patted the steering wheel. "She survived worse." As we drove away, neither of us noticed the little girl standing beside the checkpoint until she ran toward the road, waving something in her hands. Maxim slowed. Immediately, she couldn't have been older than 8. She reached the driver's window, slightly out of breath. "I made these." She held out the small blue and yellow friendship bracelets, woven from simple embroidery thread, for the volunteers. *. The little girl stood beside the van, breathing heavily after running across the checkpoint. She stretched out her hands, holding to small bracelets woven from blue and yellow thread. "They're for you." Maxim smiled. "You made these yourself?" She nodded proudly. "My grandma taught me." The bracelets weren't perfect. Some of the thread stuck out, and one side was slightly uneven, but neither of us had ever received a gift that meant more. "Thank you." I said, carefully tying one around my wrist. She grinned. You have to promise not to lose it. I promise. She looked satisfied before jogging back toward her grandmother, who stood nearby smiling quietly. As we drove away, Maxim glanced at his bracelet. You know what? I think people keep saving us. I laughed. I thought we were the ones doing the rescuing. He shook his head. Not today. By the time we returned to the coordination center, darkness had settled over the city. The basement was even busier than when we had left that morning. Generators hummed outside. Someone was unloading another truck. Volunteers hurried through the corridors carrying flashlights, notebooks, and cardboard boxes. As soon as we parked, Alana walked outside. You made it. Barely. She looked inside the van and raised her eyebrows. Where did all of this come from? Checkpoint on Soborna Street. They asked us to bring everything back. Within minutes, half a dozen volunteers surrounded the van. Boxes disappeared one after another. Medicine. Flour. Water. Baby food. Blankets. No one needed instructions. Everyone already knew where everything belonged. After helping unload the last box, I finally sat down on a folding chair. It felt like the first time all day that I had actually stopped moving. My legs ached. My shoulders burned from carrying supplies. I looked at my watch. Nearly 14 hours had passed since we left. It somehow felt like 3 days. Around 9 that evening, dinner finally arrived, if you could even call it dinner. A large pot of buckwheat porridge, a few slices of bread, tea heated on a portable gas stove. Nobody complained. People simply filled metal bowls and sat wherever there was space. Office chairs, wooden pallets. Concrete steps, the floor. Maxim dropped into the chair beside me. I never thought plain buckwheat could taste this good. Everything tastes good when you're hungry. He laughed. Fair point. For several minutes, the room became unusually quiet. Not because people had nothing to say, because everyone was too tired to speak. Then one volunteer looked up from her bowl. Does anyone know if the library is still standing? Another answered. I passed it yesterday. It's damaged, but still there. Someone else asked about the train station. Another asked whether a certain pharmacy had reopened. Little by little, conversations returned. Not about politics. Not about fear. About ordinary places, ordinary routines, ordinary life. It felt comforting somehow. Just after 10 o'clock, the lights suddenly went out. The basement fell completely silent. Only the soft hum of the emergency generator remained. Nobody panicked. Within seconds, several flashlights clicked on. One volunteer joked, "Guess the electricity wanted to go home early." A few people laughed. Alana checked her radio. "Power line again," she sighed. "We'll stay on generators tonight." Without anyone asking, people immediately adjusted. Extension cords were moved. Phones were plugged into backup batteries. Medical refrigerators switched to generator power. Within 5 minutes, everything was working again. Watching everyone cooperate so naturally made me realize something. A month earlier, none of these people had worked together. Some had never even met. Now they operated almost like one family. No arguments. No hesitation. Just trust. Around midnight, I stepped outside for fresh air. The city was almost completely dark. Streetlights no longer worked. Only a few apartment windows glowed faintly from candles. The sky above Chernihiv looked different, without city lights. Thousands of stars stretched across the darkness. For a moment, everything seemed peaceful. Then, somewhere far away, another dull explosion echoed across the horizon. Not close, but close enough. I looked down at the bracelet on my wrist. Blue. Yellow. Simple thread. I remembered the little girl's words. Promise you won't lose it. I smiled to myself. I won't. Behind me, the basement door opened. It was Maxim. He handed me 2 cups of hot tea. Couldn't sleep either. I shook my head. He leaned against the wall beside me. You think people will remember all of this? I stared across the silent city. I think they'll remember the people. The volunteers, the neighbors, the strangers who became friends. The ones who kept showing up. Maxim nodded slowly. Yeah, I hope so. Neither of us knew what tomorrow would bring. Another delivery. Another long drive. Another difficult decision. But one thing had become clear during that long day. Even when everything around us seemed uncertain, kindness still found a way forward. And sometimes, that was enough to keep an entire city moving. The next morning began before sunrise. No alarm clock was necessary anymore. The distant rumble of artillery had become the city's unofficial morning signal. At 5:30 a.m., the basement, slowly filled with volunteers rubbing sleep from their eyes, wrapping scarves around their necks, and pouring instant coffee into metal cups. Someone had pinned a handwritten sign to the wall overnight. Check on your teammate before you leave. Nobody knew who had written it. Nobody asked. It simply became another unwritten rule. Alana spread a fresh map across the main table. We've received several new requests. She pointed toward a neighborhood on the eastern side of the city. A local shelter is running low on food. Another mark. This clinic needs antibiotics. Another. And a kindergarten basement has nearly 40 civilians staying there. Maxim looked at the growing list. Looks like we're staying busy. Alana smiled tiredly. I hope so. What do you mean? She folded her arms. If volunteers stop being busy. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Before leaving, I checked the supplies inside the van. Water. Medical kits. Flashlights. Blankets. Portable phone chargers. Everything was packed with military precision now. Every square centimeter mattered. As I closed the rear doors, I noticed something tucked beneath the windshield wiper. A folded piece of paper. I opened it. Inside was a child's drawing. To volunteers standing beside a white van. A bright blue sky. A huge yellow sun. At the top, written in slightly crooked handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for helping our city." No name. No signature. Just that. I carefully folded the picture and slipped it inside my notebook. I think that's staying with me forever. I whispered. The roads were quieter than yesterday. People had learned to travel only when absolutely necessary. Even so, every few blocks we passed someone pulling a cart loaded with bottled water or carrying firewood over one shoulder. Nobody walked empty-handed anymore. Everyone was helping someone. As we crossed a small bridge, Maxim slowed down. Look. A group of teenagers stood beside the riverbank filling sandbags. They couldn't have been older than 16. Some wore school backpacks while they worked. One noticed our van and gave us a thumbs up. Without thinking, Maxim honked twice. The teenagers cheered. It lasted only a second, but somehow it made the morning feel lighter. Our first destination was the underground shelter beneath a kindergarten. The building itself looked deserted. Curtains covered every window. The playground outside stood completely empty. Only after we knocked did someone unlock the heavy basement door. Warm air drifted upward. Along with the smell of soup. Inside, dozens of people were living together. Families. Grandparents. Young children. Even two cats wandered freely between rows of folding beds. The walls were covered with children's drawings. Rainbows. Flowers. Sunflowers. Blue skies. One little boy proudly pointed toward a picture taped beside the entrance. I drew that yesterday. It showed a house with a Ukrainian flag flying above it. That's beautiful, I said. He smiled. When the war ends, I'm going to draw the same house outside. His mother gently placed a hand on his shoulder. You will. There wasn't the slightest doubt in her voice. We unloaded the supplies together. Boxes disappeared quickly into a small storage room. One woman checked every item against a handwritten inventory. Nothing was wasted. Nothing sat unused. As we prepared to leave, the shelter coordinator stopped us. Wait, she returned carrying a large plastic container. Fresh borscht. We made extra. You've probably been eating canned food for days. Maxim laughed. You have no idea. She handed each of us a sealed container. No arguments. We have enough. As we climbed back into the van, the smell of homemade soup filled the cab. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Maxim looked at the container. My grandmother makes hers exactly like this. I smiled. So does mine. Somehow, that single meal reminded both of us that home still existed even if, for now, it looked very different.